The howl of the wind rattled the windows of Edinburgh Waverley Station as Gideon Drake stood alone on the platform, his coat drawn tight against the biting November chill. Overhead, the station sign flickered dimly in the stormlight, casting an eerie glow across the rain-slick concrete. Before him stretched the Caledonian Sleeper, a majestic train of vintage charm, its polished carriages gleaming like relics from another era, stark against the sterile modernity of the station. At 67, Gideon wasn't sure he had the patience for a journey like this anymore. The days of covert missions, coded messages, and high-stakes interrogations were long behind him. Retirement had settled into the bones of his life like damp fog, quiet, slow, and lonely. His daughter's constant invitations to visit her in Seven Oaks, Kent, had finally broken through his reluctance. Maybe, just maybe, a weekend away would be the disruption he needed. The shrill whistle of the train sliced through the night, calling him back to the present. Adjusting his grip on a well-worn leather bag, Gideon stepped aboard. Inside, the warm amber glow of antique lamps threw long shadows along the corridor walls. The scent of aged wood and time-worn upholstery mingled with the faintest trace of pipe smoke, a scent that whispered of old secrets and older souls. Navigating toward his cabin, Gideon noted the assortment of passengers already settling in. A wiry man sat nervously in the corner of the lounge car, his close-cropped hair and darting eyes making him look perpetually on edge. His suit was too crisp, too new, like it belonged to someone else. Gideon pegged him as a man hiding something. He filed that away, a habit he never quite unlearned. A few seats down, a woman in her 50s thumbed through a tattered copy of The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Her glasses clung precariously to the tip of her nose, and a pencil tapped rhythmically against her lip. When she noticed Gideon watching, she looked up. "Vivian," she offered with a small smile. "History teacher." "You, Gideon Drake," he replied, extending a hand. "Visiting family." Vivian's polite nod was accompanied by an almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes. Sharp, observant, watching more than she let on. Further down, a young uniformed train guard moved down the aisle checking tickets. His name tag read Gavin. He greeted passengers with a cheerfulness that felt rehearsed, his eyes shadowed with a fatigue that betrayed it all. In the dining car, a bulky man in a wool sweater stood behind the bar, chatting amiably with a traveler. His thick Bulgarian accent added an exotic melody to his words. The name Manuel was stitched across his chest in red thread. Finally, Gideon reached his cabin. He dropped his bag beside the neatly made bunk and sank into the armchair by the window. Rain now lashed furiously against the glass, transforming the station lights into swirling smears of yellow and white. As the train lurched into motion, Gideon leaned back, letting the rhythm of the tracks pull him towards sleep. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of peace. But it didn't last. A knock startled him upright. He slid open the cabin door to find Gavin standing just outside. "Apologies for disturbing you, sir," Gavin said, his voice low. "Just checking in. Storm's gotten worse. Might be a bumpy ride." "I'm fine, thank you," Gideon replied, but studied the young man's face. There was tension there, something unsaid. As Gavin moved on, Gideon watched the corridor long after he disappeared. That flicker of peace? Already gone. Something had started. He just didn't know what yet. Chapter 2. The First Vanishing. The storm intensified as the train rolled southward. Sheets of rain hammered the windows, and lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating fleeting glimpses of skeletal trees and abandoned fields. Inside, the vintage carriages swayed gently, their charm offset by the growing unease that crawled beneath Gideon's skin. He didn't know why. He couldn't name it. But after decades in intelligence, he had learned to trust his gut. And tonight it was screaming. Maybe it was Gavin's too quiet voice. Maybe it was the way Vivian's eyes lingered a second too long on his reflection in the lounge car window. Either way, Gideon wasn't about to relax. An hour into the journey, he rose from his seat and wandered through the train. In the lounge car, Vivian was still engrossed in her book, though her eyes now skimmed the room over the rim of her glasses. Manuel laughed heartily behind the bar, pouring drinks for a cluster of passengers. The nervous man in the suit now sat alone at a corner table, hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of tea as if it were his last lifeline. Gideon leaned against the bar, watching. The chatter around him sounded like static, small talk masking tension. The storm may have been outside, but something more dangerous brewed in here. "Anything for you, sir?" Manuel asked. "Just water," Gideon replied. As the barkeep turned, the train jolted violently. A woman screamed. A glass shattered. Red wine spilled across a table like blood. The lights flickered and died. For a breathless moment, the car was plunged into near-total darkness. "Storm's worse than I thought," Manuel muttered, steadying himself. The lights blinked back to life, and Gavin appeared, soaked and out of breath. "Just a branch on the track," he announced, attempting to calm the room. Nothing to worry about. But something was wrong. The nervous man, he was gone. His teacup still sat there, steam rising. Gideon scanned the car. "Where'd he go?" he asked aloud. Vivian looked up, frowning. "Who?" "The man sitting there," Gideon pointed. Her brow creased. "I didn't see anyone." Manuel shook his head too. "Wasn't serving anyone at that table." Gideon's spine stiffened. He was certain that man had been there. So why was everyone acting like he hadn't existed? Without another word, Gideon moved to the door at the far end of the car. It creaked open with a metallic groan, revealing the swaying corridor to the sleeper cabins. Wind rushed through as he stepped across, the storm howling just outside. The hallway was empty. Each door he passed was either locked or softly humming with the sounds of sleep. Others were unoccupied, the beds still perfectly made. At the end of the corridor, something caught his eye, a scrap of paper wedged into the doorframe. He unfolded it carefully. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were the words. It didn't have to be this way. There was no name, no explanation, just that one haunting line. It was enough. Gideon slipped the note into his coat pocket. As he returned to the lounge car, the passengers had resumed their conversations, but now the room buzzed with a quiet anxiety. Vivian looked up again as he entered. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Gideon paused. Not yet, but something told him he would, and when he did, it might already be too late. Megaphone, if you're watching this on the Crime Chapter 1. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more gripping mysteries, and tell us in the comments. What do you think is happening on this midnight train? Where did the man vanish to, and why? Stepping inside behind him, she wrinkled her nose as the scent hit her, sharp, acrid, and unnatural. Gideon knelt beside the tipped suitcase. Nestled beneath a tangle of clothes was a small device, partially melted, its wires frayed and casing charred. He reached out, hesitating just long enough to prepare for the worst, and then picked it up. "A transmitter," he muttered grimly. Or at least it was. Vivian stared at the damaged device. "That doesn't belong to a passenger." "No," Gideon said, his eyes narrowing. This was professional grade. Military frequency, maybe, or something close. From the doorway, Gavin's voice cracked with confusion. Why would anyone have that on a passenger train? Gideon stood up slowly, the device still in his hands. "Because someone doesn't want us communicating. That technical issue you mentioned earlier, this is part of it." Vivian's breath caught in her throat. "You think someone disabled the train systems on purpose?" "I don't think," Gideon said flatly. "I know." Another gust of wind rocked the train violently, and from somewhere ahead, a metallic bang echoed, as though a door had slammed or something heavier had fallen. All three of them froze, listening, but no second sound followed. Gideon turned to Gavin. "I want a list of every passenger on board. Names, seat numbers, anything you've got." Gavin hesitated, then nodded. "I'll grab the manifest." As he disappeared down the corridor, Vivian crossed her arms. "You think someone planted that? On board with us now." Gideon nodded slowly. "Whoever left the notes, they're not just trying to scare us. They planned this. And if they've planned this," Vivian added, her voice steadying, "then there's a next move." Gideon met her eyes. "Exactly." They returned to the lounge car to wait for Gavin, who arrived a few minutes later, breathing heavily and clutching a battered clipboard. 34 passengers, he said, flipping to a page. "Including you two." But what?" Gideon asked. Gavin tapped the manifest. There's no one registered matching the description of the man you saw. Vivian blinked. What? I double-checked, Gavin insisted. No tall, thin man in a suit. No name that fits. It's like he never boarded. Gideon's mind raced. Then either he slipped on without being logged, he trailed off, or someone helped him. Vivian finished. Outside, the storm continued to hammer the train like fists on a coffin. Thunder rolled across the sky in a low, angry growl. We need to talk to the passengers, Gideon said finally. Quietly, one by one. Someone might have seen something. Vivian nodded. And if they haven't? Gideon looked at the flickering ceiling lights, the rumble beneath his feet, and the memory of the blood smear on the floor. Then we're not dealing with a stranger on board, he said. We're dealing with someone who knows this train. Someone who planned every detail. And we're already playing catch-up. From the far end of the lounge car came a muffled scream. They ran. Chapter 6. The Passenger Without a Name. The scream had come from the sleeping car, a terrified, choked sound that silenced the storm for a moment with its urgency. Gideon reached the cabin door first and threw it open, his heart pounding. Inside, a woman stood trembling beside her bunk, her hands clutched to her mouth. Her eyes were locked on something just out of sight. Gideon stepped inside slowly, cautiously. Lying on the floor was a man, middle-aged, dressed in business casual, unmoving. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling in frozen shock. A thin ribbon of blood snaked from the corner of his mouth. Vivian checked his pulse, then shook her head. He's gone. The woman backed into a corner, her voice hoarse. I heard something like scratching. I thought it was the storm. Then I looked down and he was just there. Gideon scanned the small room. No sign of forced entry. No noise. No struggle. Vivian stood, her expression grim. How did someone get in here without being seen? And why him? Gavin arrived, his face pale as he saw the body. That's Philip Granger, consultant, boarded in York, kept to himself mostly. Any enemies? Gideon asked. Gavin blinked. Not that I know of. He barely spoke to anyone. Exactly, Gideon said softly. So why is he dead? Vivian's gaze flicked to the wall, where something was written just above the bed, smeared in dark red. You were warned. The air thickened. I need this car locked down, Gideon ordered. No one leaves. No one enters unless we say so. Tell the passengers it's storm damage if you have to. Gavin nodded shakily and disappeared down the corridor. Vivian whispered, This is no random killing. No, Gideon replied. This is a message. And if we don't figure it out. He looked back at the dead man and the warning etched on the wall. There'll be another. Gideon stepped in first, instinct sharp, every sense alert. The room was a mess. Blankets flung carelessly across the floor, a suitcase overturned, contents spilling out like secrets exposed. But what made him stop cold was the smell. Burnt metal. Vivian stepped in behind him, her voice quiet but tense. What is that? Gideon didn't answer immediately. He moved further into the cabin, eyes scanning every corner, every detail. He knelt near the heating vent, where the smell seemed strongest, pressing his palm lightly to the floor. It was warm, too warm. Vivian crouched beside him, glancing at the vent. Something happened here. Gideon nodded slowly, the tension in his jaw tightening. Something recent. A sudden noise made them both jump. A metallic clank from the hallway, sharp and echoing. They turned toward the door, but saw nothing. Only the dim, flickering light and the eerie silence that followed. Vivian swallowed. This old train feels wrong. It is wrong, Gideon replied. And it's getting worse. He stood, eyes lingering on the disordered room. Let's move. Whatever's happening, it's spreading. We need answers. Fast. They stepped back into the corridor, the shadows seeming to stretch longer behind them. The storm howled, relentless. And somewhere, hidden in the belly of the train, the truth waited, watching, waiting to be found. Chapter 7. A Light in the Dark. Wait, Gideon said, pausing and straining his ears. At first, nothing. Just the train's soft groans. Then, faintly a low hum. It wasn't mechanical. It felt more like a vibration pulsing through the air and into his bones. It's coming from up ahead, Vivian whispered. Gideon nodded, his grip tightening on the flashlight. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the very air around them was thickening. At the end of the corridor, the walls opened into a vast space, far too large to belong on a passenger train. The flashlight beam revealed steel beams and overhead pipes dripping with condensation. The floor beneath them was solid concrete, stained with dark patches Gideon instinctively avoided. In the center of the room stood a single chair. "What is this?" Gavin asked, his voice cracking. "Looks like an interrogation room," Vivian murmured, her tone grim. Gideon's eyes narrowed. She was right. The setup was hauntingly similar to makeshift rooms he'd seen while investigating military crimes. But why would something like this exist on a train? As they stepped closer, the hum intensified, vibrating now in Gideon's chest. He swept the flashlight toward the chair and froze. Lying on the seat was a small, rectangular device. Smooth, black, with a single red light blinking at its center. "What is that?" Vivian asked, stepping closer. "Don't touch it," Gideon warned, extending his arm to stop her. The red light blinked faster as they approached. The hum rose in pitch. Gideon crouched, examining the object. His mind raced. It wasn't a bomb, at least not any kind he'd ever encountered, but it was definitely advanced and deeply out of place. Suddenly, the red light turned solid. A distorted voice filled the room. It didn't have to be this way. The three of them jumped. Gavin yelped. The voice was mechanical, emotionless, but the words, it had used the same ones as the notes. "What the hell is going on?" Gavin stammered, backing away. Gideon didn't answer. His focus was locked on the device, the voice, and an overwhelming sense that they were being watched. The voice returned, louder. "You were warned." "Warned about what?" Vivian demanded, stepping forward despite Gideon's protests. The device emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine. The room shuddered. Gideon grabbed Vivian and yanked her backward just as the red light blinked out. The hum vanished. Silence fell, complete and consuming. Then the shadows shifted. "What was that?" Gavin whispered. Gideon turned the flashlight toward the walls. Nothing. No movement. No figures. Just the skeletal outlines of pipes and beams. "We need to get out of here," he said firmly. They turned back toward the corridor, but the door slammed shut in front of them. Gideon lunged for the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Now what?" Vivian asked, panic in her voice. "Calm down," Gideon said, though his heart pounded in his chest. He swept the flashlight back toward the room, searching for another way out. And that's when he saw it. A figure. It stood at the far end of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. "Do you see that?" Gideon whispered. Vivian and Gavin turned. Their eyes widened. The figure stepped forward. Its movements were slow, deliberate. It entered the flashlight beam, and Gideon's breath caught. It wasn't a person. It was a shadow. Dark, featureless. Its edges danced like smoke. The voice returned. Low, menacing. "This is your last chance." Before Gideon could react, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. The darkness was suffocating. Gideon's heart pounded, each beat like a drum in the silence. The storm outside was a memory now, swallowed by the oppressive void within the train. "Gideon," Vivian's voice trembled, barely a whisper. "I'm here," he said, reaching out blindly. His hand brushed her arm, and she clutched his fingers tightly. "Stay close." "Gavin, I'm here." Gavin choked, his voice cracking. The air felt heavy. The walls pressed inward. Gideon fumbled with the flashlight, tapping it against his palm, desperate for a spark of light. It flickered, weakly, casting erratic shadows that only made the darkness more terrifying. The figure was gone. "Where did it go?" Vivian asked, eyes darting around the room. "I don't know," Gideon whispered, "but we're not staying to find out." The corridor door was still sealed, its handle frozen. Gideon turned his flashlight across the room, searching desperately, when he spotted a faint glow. A glimmer on the far wall. A small panel, embedded seamlessly. Its edges pulsed with soft blue light. "Over there," he said, pulling Vivian and Gavin toward it. The panel was smooth and silent, with a single square button at its center. The glow painted their faces in an icy hue. "What is this?" Gavin asked, staring warily. "Some kind of tech," Gideon muttered, "but nothing I've seen before." He leaned closer. "Maybe it controls the door." "Only one way to find out," he said, and pressed the button. The room trembled violently. Gideon froze, wondering if they'd made a fatal mistake. Then, the blue light swelled to a blinding intensity, and just as quickly it dimmed. With a hiss, the door slid open. "Go!" Gideon shouted, pushing Vivian and Gavin through the exit. They stumbled into the corridor, the familiar clatter of the train rushing back into their ears. The storm howled once more, a strange comfort after the silence they'd just escaped. "What the hell was that?" Gavin asked, pale. "Not somewhere we were supposed to be," Gideon muttered, scanning for danger. Vivian leaned against the wall, struggling to catch her breath. "This is insane. That room, that shadow, the notes, what does any of it mean?" "I don't know yet," Gideon replied. "But someone, or something, wants us to figure it out." They moved cautiously through the train now. The flickering lights and creaking walls no longer felt normal. They felt hostile, ominous. The other passengers seemed unaware, still asleep, or murmuring in their cabins. But then, as they passed through the lounge car, Gideon froze. The man in the suit was back, sitting at the same table, hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea, staring blankly ahead as though nothing had happened. "That's him," Gideon whispered. Vivian looked and stopped cold. "How is he back?" "Stay here," Gideon said, stepping forward. Up close, the man looked wrong. His skin was pale, almost wax-like, as if he weren't real. "Where have you been?" Gideon asked. The man blinked slowly. His mouth opened as if to speak, but instead, a thin line of blood spilled from his lips. He slumped forward. His head hit the table with a sickening thud. "Gideon!" Vivian cried, rushing to his side. Gideon checked for a pulse. Nothing. The man was ice-cold, stiff, dead for hours. "What's happening?" Gavin asked, his voice trembling. Gideon clenched his jaw. "We're running out of time." Next to the man's lifeless hand lay another note. Just 5 words, written in the same cryptic script. It didn't have to be. If you're intrigued by this mystery and want to uncover what happens next, subscribe to the Crime Chapter 1. Like this video, and let us know in the comments. What do you think is really going on aboard this train? Warning. Rain lashed the windows with such force, it sounded like the train was under siege. The iron beast thundered forward into the night, its rhythm steady, mechanical, while inside, human fear spread like wildfire. Chapter 10 continued the gambit. Gideon stood alone now in cabin 9. He had chosen it carefully, close enough to the lounge for backup, but far enough to feel isolated. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Every creak of the carriage, every moan of the steel frame, sounded louder when you were waiting for death. He sat at the edge of the bunk, note in hand. It didn't have to be this way. The words echoed in his mind. What was the message behind them? Was it guilt? A warning? Or just manipulation from someone who enjoyed watching fear grow in closed spaces? He kept the door unlocked, an invitation. Back in the lounge, Vivian sat near the window, eyes trained on the corridor leading to the sleeper car. Gavin paced nearby, a nervous energy radiating off him like heat. "You think he'll be all right?" Gavin asked, voice low. Vivian didn't look away. "He's prepared. But that doesn't mean I'm not scared." Then, the lights dimmed again. The train jolted. Gavin froze. That's the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Vivian stood. Something's happening. In the sleeper car, Gideon heard it too, a soft click like a door slowly opening down the hall. He rose silently, flashlight in hand. The corridor outside was dark. He stepped out. The hum of the train was still present, but beneath it, something else. Breathing? He turned right. The door to cabin 11, the one next to his, was ajar. No one was supposed to be there. He approached. Behind him, the door to his own cabin slammed shut. He spun around, nothing. The hallway was empty, bathed in flickering light. And then he saw it. A figure, just for a second, standing at the far end of the corridor. Too tall, its face masked in shadow, distorted by the flickering light. Then gone. Gideon rushed forward, but the end of the hall was empty. He opened the door to the next carriage. Locked. He banged on it. Nothing. Behind him, a whisper. Wrong move. He turned, but again, nothing. The game had begun. Back in the lounge, Vivian felt her gut twist. He's taking too long, she said. Gavin moved toward the corridor. We should go check. Wait, Vivian stopped him. Look, one of the passengers, the teenager with the headphones, was no longer in his seat. His headphones lay on the table. Vivian stood quickly. Did you see him leave? Gavin shook his head. No, he was just there. She darted to the nearest window, eyes scanning the platform outside. Rain smeared the glass into streaks of gray and black. No one. Then her eyes fell to the floor near the bar. A trail of wet footprints, leading toward the kitchen. Vivian followed them silently, heart hammering. The kitchen door creaked as she pushed it open. Empty. Then, bang, a metal tray fell from a shelf. Vivian ducked, turning but saw nothing. Her breath came in shallow gasps. And then she heard it. A whisper, almost too quiet to catch. It didn't have to be this way. She turned toward the voice, only to find the scruffy man with the flask standing there, eyes glassy, arms hanging loose at his sides. Did you say something? She demanded. But he just looked through her and collapsed. In the sleeper car, Gideon returned to cabin 9. It was locked. That door, he'd left it open. He fished the key from his pocket, inserted it into the lock. It jammed. He tried again. Click. It opened. Inside, everything looked untouched, except the bunk. Where there had been no note before, there was one now. Folded. Neat. Waiting. He opened it with trembling fingers. You were never supposed to see this. Stop digging. You're not the one they chose. His blood ran cold. The game wasn't just about finding the killer anymore. It was personal. Someone, or something, had a plan, a selection process, and he had just broken the rules. And that meant the real danger had just begun. The wind howling like a wounded animal, scraping against the windows as if trying to claw its way inside. The entire train felt suspended in a fragile moment, one breath away from shattering. Gideon sat alone in cabin 9, the door slightly ajar to play into the illusion. The dim light above him flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. His hand hovered near the concealed taser tucked beneath his coat. Every creak of the carriage made his muscles tense. He didn't know what or who was coming, only that it would come. In the lounge car, Vivian monitored the hallway through a makeshift peephole crafted from the partially drawn curtain. Gavin sat nearby, nervously fidgeting with a pen and paper, scribbling random shapes to distract himself. The silence between them stretched like a taut wire. You really think this will work? Gavin whispered. Vivian didn't answer at first. Her eyes remained locked on the corridor. Then quietly she said, It has to. Back in cabin 9, Gideon noticed the temperature drop. Not a trick of the storm outside, something else. The air itself felt heavier, electric. He rose slowly, inching toward the crack in the door. Then he heard it, a soft creak from the end of the hallway. Not the train's natural rhythm. A footstep, deliberate, slow. Gideon pressed himself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding. Another footstep, closer now. A shadow flickered past the glass of the cabin window. Then silence. Suddenly, the lights across the sleeper car cut out, plunging Gideon into darkness. Vivian, he whispered into the two-way radio hidden in his jacket. Lights just went out. Her voice crackled through. We see it. No movement from our side. Be ready. Gideon drew the taser, his breath shallow. Footsteps again. Quicker now. Approaching fast. And then, the cabin door swung fully open. He lunged. His taser met flesh with a sickening jolt and a cry of pain. The figure collapsed against the doorway. Not who he expected. It was Manuel. Vivian and Gavin arrived seconds later, breathless. What the hell? Gavin blurted, staring at the unconscious bartender sprawled across the threshold. Vivian knelt down beside Manuel, checking his pulse. He's alive. Gideon's face darkened, which means it wasn't him leaving the notes. Vivian's eyes widened. Then why was he creeping through the sleeper cars? Manuel groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. I thought someone was in danger. I saw movement outside the lounge car window. Someone in the reflection. You should have told us, Gideon snapped. I didn't want to be accused, Manuel muttered, his voice weak. Passengers are scared enough already. I thought I could handle on my own. Gideon stepped back, his mind racing. If it wasn't him. Then the train lurched violently. All three were thrown against the walls. Distant shouts echoed from further down the train. And then came a new sound, something none of them had heard before. Screaming. Raw, primal, terrified. Vivian was already running toward the sound, Gideon close behind. Gavin hesitated a moment, then followed. They reached the end of the corridor, the baggage car. The door was ajar, hanging off its hinges. Inside, the scene was chaos. One of the passengers, the older man with the scruffy beard, was sprawled across the floor, claw marks raked across his chest. Blood soaked into the wooden boards beneath him. Standing over him was the woman in the tailored suit. Her hands shaking, her phone shattered at her feet, her face blank with horror. I didn't touch him, she stammered, stepping back. I was just trying to check on the noise. He was already like this. Gideon moved toward the body, but Vivian grabbed his arm. Look at his face. The man's eyes were wide open, staring in absolute terror. His lips twisted into a scream that never came. Gideon turned back to the woman. What did you see? She shook her head, breathing erratic. Nothing, just shadows. And then I thought I saw someone standing behind him. Tall, pale, but when I blinked it was gone. Vivian whispered, another message. Sure enough, clutched in the man's dead hand was another folded note. Gideon took it carefully, opened it. It read, You're too close. His hands trembled as he folded the note again. Someone was watching them, taunting them, always one step ahead. Vivian's voice trembled. It knows we're trying to fight back. Gideon nodded slowly. And it started to fight back, too. Behind them, Gavin stood pale and frozen. How we stop this? Gideon looked down at the latest body, then at the note, then at the storm swirling outside the windows, like the train was moving through another world entirely. I don't know yet, he said, but I think we've been looking inside the train for too long. Vivian furrowed her brow. What do you mean? Gideon turned to her, his voice low and cold. I think the enemy might not be on the train. Chapter 11. Outside the tracks. The train thundered onward, yet something had shifted. Not in its mechanics, but in its very aura. The steel serpent felt less like a machine on tracks, and more like a caged beast barreling toward something no one could name. Vivian sat across from Gideon in the quiet of the dimmed dining car, the hum of the engine offering their only rhythm. Gavin paced near the exit door, chewing at his thumbnail, jumping at every clang or distant footfall. The body had been moved. The other passengers, though still scared, had been corralled back to their cabins under the guise of a freak accident. Vivian didn't believe in accidents anymore. What did you mean? She asked finally, cutting through the silence. That the enemy might not be on the train? Gideon leaned back, exhaling hard. Everything we've assumed, the murders, the notes, the manipulation, it's all pointed toward someone among us. But the timing, the method. He looked toward the storm raging outside the windows. What if this isn't about someone? What if it's about something? Gavin snorted nervously. What, like a ghost train? Is that what you're saying? Are we on some cursed rail line to hell? Vivian shook her head. Not ghosts. But we can't ignore what's happening anymore. The body count, the clues, the way each death seems crafted, like a story being written around us. Gideon added, and the story always escalates. This isn't random. Vivian reached in her jacket and pulled out all the notes they'd gathered, each one folded and stained. She laid them on the table like tarot cards. 5 messages, each more direct than the last. You will forget. You are not alone. Help her. You're being watched. You're too close. She stared at them, her voice dropping. Help who? Gideon stood suddenly, startling both of them. We've been trapped inside this machine, waiting for the next horror to show itself, he said. But what if the answers are outside? Not in the cabins, not in the victims, but where this train is taking us. Or what it's running from. Gavin looked toward the sealed exit doors. You want to step out into that? He gestured toward the glass. The storm outside looked biblical. Sheets of ice rain lashing sideways. Lightning tearing the night like a knife through paper. Yes, Gideon said. You're insane, Gavin snapped. But Vivian stood up beside Gideon. No, he's not. I felt it too. Like the train itself is part of the game. Maybe it's the board, not the players. Gavin hesitated. How do you even plan to? But Gideon was already moving, wrenching open a supply cabinet. Inside were emergency coats, flare guns, signal radios. They're the maintenance ladder down the kitchen car that leads to the undercarriage. If we can crawl out near the rear coupling, we might be able to get a look at the track. Maybe even stop the train. Vivian grabbed a coat. Or see what's driving it. Gavin exhaled slowly, realizing he had no choice but to follow. This is madness, he muttered, grabbing the last coat. Minutes later, they crept down to the maintenance hatch. The storm louder now, screaming across the surface of the train like a tortured whale. Gideon opened the panel slowly. Cold, wet air burst through like a living thing. He dropped down first, landing hard onto the rear platform, gripping the railing against the wind. Vivian followed, her boots slipping on the icy metal. Gavin, muttering prayers, descended last. The three of them stood, crouched low, wind and rain blasting their faces as they inched along the thin ledge toward the back of the final car. Then they saw it. Beyond the last carriage, the track was gone. Or rather, it was no longer a track. What stretched before them was a void. An endless tunnel of blackness into which the train sped without hesitation. The rails simply ended, and the ground beneath the train was no longer solid. It was lightless, infinite space. It wasn't just a storm they were hurtling through. It was nothing. Vivian gasped. What the hell is this? Gideon stared, speechless. His mind struggled to understand what his eyes were reporting. Then Gavin cried out. Look! He pointed toward the void. And from it, something moved. A figure. Tall. Unnaturally thin. Walking on nothing. Each step bringing it closer to the rear of the train. Its face, featureless. Its presence, wrong. Gideon raised the flare gun and fired. The flare hissed through the air and vanished, absorbed by the black. The figure did not stop. Vivian pulled at Gideon. We need to go. Now. They scrambled back toward the hatch, slamming it shut behind them, breathless and dripping, the cold still clinging to their skin. None of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Gavin whispered that thing's following us. Vivian turned to Gideon. Now do you still think this is a story? He shook his head slowly. No, this isn't a story. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's a warning. Plunging the room into darkness, Gideon flipped on his flashlight, its beams slicing through the blackness. The cabin was empty. At first. Then he saw it, a shadow moving along the wall, its shape shifting unnaturally. Show yourself, Gideon commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding through him. The shadow hesitated, its edges rippling like smoke. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, slamming into Gideon with an invisible force that sent him sprawling to the floor. Scrambling up, he caught the flashlight as it spun wildly, casting frantic patterns on the walls. The shadow was gone, but the heavy feeling of being watched lingered. On the table where his notebook had been lay another note. You were warned. Gideon's chest tightened as he picked it up. The handwriting matched the others, jagged and hurried. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Vivian and Gavin rushed in, faces pale with fear. We saw it. Vivian said, her voice trembling. A shadow. It wasn't human. It was here. Giant held up the note. What does it say? Gavin asked. Giant read aloud. You were warned. The three of them stood silent, the storm raging outside as the train hurtled through the night. Chapter 11. A Step Ahead. The cabin felt colder now, the shadow's presence lingering like icy breath on Gideon's neck. Vivian and Gavin stood frozen in the doorway, faces pale beneath the flickering light. We need to regroup, Gideon said, slipping the note into his pocket. If whatever this is can move like that, we can't afford to split up anymore. Where do we go? Gavin asked, voice trembling. The lounge, Gideon replied. It's central, and we'll have a clear view of anyone moving between cars. Vivian nodded, though her hands still trembled. What's the plan? Giant, you said we'd draw them out, but it feels like they're always one step ahead. They are, Giant admitted grimly. But this note, you were warned, it's different. Not as a taunt, it's an escalation. As the three moved toward the lounge car, the train jolted hard. The lights flickered violently, and for a fleeting moment, Gideon thought he saw the shadow dart along the wall ahead. When the light steadied, it was gone. Did you see that? Vivian whispered. Gideon nodded, gripping his flashlight tighter. Stay close. The lounge was quieter than before. Passengers huddled in small groups, their murmurs filled with fear and confusion. Manuel stood behind the counter, his usual calm replaced by a nervous edge. What happened? He asked, eyes narrowing. Nothing you need to worry about, Gideon replied curtly. Everyone stays here until we figure this out. Manuel raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue, wiping the counter mechanically while his mind seemed elsewhere. Pulling Vivian and Gavin into a corner, Gideon lowered his voice. We're missing something. These notes, they're clues, but we're not piecing them together fast enough. Maybe it's a message. Something we're supposed to figure out before it's too late, Vivian added, brow furrowed. Gideon nodded. The first note said it didn't have to be this way. A warning and a clue. Whoever wrote it believed this could have been avoided. The second, Gavin asked. They're watching. Don't trust anyone. It's paranoia or a distraction. Giant recited. And the last, Vivian added, you were warned. That feels final. Exactly, Gideon said grimly. The escalation isn't just in the words, it's the timing. The shadow, the notes, the disappearances, they're all building towards something. What do? Vivian asked. We flip the game, Giant said. Stop reacting. Start forcing their hand. Ow! Gavin's voice was filled with doubt. Gideon's mind raced. Shadow movements, strange tech in the secret room, scorch marks. It all pointed to something more advanced than a simple killer or saboteur. There was method to the madness, and they needed the core answer. The engine room, Gideon said suddenly. The answer isn't in the cabins or lounge. It's there. Vivian's eyes widened. You think they're hiding there? No, Giant said resolutely. But it's where this started. The driver's disappearance, the train seemingly running itself. It's the only place that makes sense. What if it's a trap? Gavin asked. Probably, Gideon admitted. But we don't have a choice. The journey back was tense. Every creak and gust put them on edge. Passengers watched as they left the lounge, eyes full of unspoken questions. At the engine room door, Gideon hesitated. Last time, all they found was another cryptic note. This time he was determined. Ready? He asked, glancing at Vivian and Gavin. Vivian nodded, jaw set. Gavin swallowed, but gave a reluctant thumbs up. Inside, the room was silent, controls glowing faintly. But something was different. The chair, once empty, now held a figure slumped forward, face hidden in shadows. Driver? Gavin whispered. Stop, Gideon ordered sharply. Shining the flashlight, Gideon saw it wasn't the driver, but a mannequin. Eerily lifelike, eyes blank, mouth frozen in a slight smile. In its lap was another note. The answer lies in the light. Gideon stepped back, mind racing. The light, Vivian asked, pointing to a panel near the controls glowing faintly blue. Gideon moved to the panel, brushing his fingers over its smooth surface and pressing a button. The room shuddered, blue light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Then the world tilted. For a dizzying moment, Gideon felt weightless, as if the train had vanished. When the light dimmed, they found themselves in a long metallic corridor lined with pulsating lights. The hum they heard before now filled their chests like a heartbeat. What is this? Vivian whispered, trembling. Gideon's eyes narrowed. This is where it begins. Chapter 12. The Hidden Path. The corridor stretched endlessly, lights casting shifting shadows. The hum vibrated through Gideon's chest, an ominous warning. Vivian and Gavin stayed close, breath shallow in the cold, sterile air. This isn't part of the train, Vivian said, voice trembling. No, Gideon agreed. It's something else, but connected. It has to be. Gavin rubbed his arms, teeth chattering. I don't like this. This isn't natural. Keep it together, Gideon said firmly. We're here for a reason. The corridor was unnervingly silent, except for the steady hum and distant machinery. The walls seemed to ripple faintly, reacting to their presence. Vivian stopped suddenly, grabbing Gideon's arm. Ahead, a door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large chamber bathed in pale blue light. Rows of consoles blinked with indecipherable symbols that shifted and swirled like living things. At the center stood a pedestal with a small device glowing faintly blue, the same color filling the room. What is that? Gavin whispered. Gideon stepped forward cautiously. Maybe the source of all this. Vivian's gaze darted around the room. It's like a command center, but for what? As they approached, the hum grew louder, the device pulsing as if alive. Gideon reached out, but Vivian grabbed his arm. Wait, what if it's dangerous? It probably is, Gideon said, eyes fixed on the device. But we didn't come this far to back down. He placed his hand on the device. The hum stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep resonant tone that shook the air. Screens around them lit up, flashing faces, places, and events in a chaotic swirl. What's happening? Gavin shouted, shielding his eyes. The device pulsed, and a voice filled the room. You were warned. It was the same mechanical voice, deeper and more commanding. Who are you? Gideon demanded. We're the architects, the voice responded coldly. The balance has been disrupted. You must restore it. Restore what? Vivian shouted. The screens flickered, showing the train with frozen, fearful faces and looming shadowy figures. They have taken what is not theirs. The cycle cannot continue. You must choose. Images shifted to show the train hurtling through the storm, glowing faintly blue. What does that mean? Gideon demanded. The device pulsed again, revealing the train empty. No passengers, no shadows, just a hollow shell moving through the night. You'll understand, the voice said. But not yet. The light intensified, the hum louder than ever. The walls folded inward until all was rushing wind. Gideon opened his eyes, back in the engine room. The controls glowed faintly, and the storm roared outside. Vivian and Gavin stood, dazed beside him. What just happened? Vivian's voice shook. Gideon looked around, mind racing. The pedestal, the chamber, the voice, it's gone. But the warning remains. We were shown a choice, one we're not ready to make. Gavin sank down, hands trembling. This is insane. I didn't sign up for this. None of us did, Gideon said, placing a hand on Gavin's shoulder. But we're here now. We have to see it through. Vivian nodded slowly, fear giving way to determination. Whatever this is, it's not over. Gideon stared out the window, watching the storm rage as the train raced through darkness. The shadows still lurked at the edges of his vision, waiting for the moment to strike. We need answers, he said quietly. Something was wrong. At first, they thought it was just a robbery gone wrong, maybe a fugitive picking people off one by one. But it wasn't. What was it? Gavin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Manuel hesitated, his expression darkening. It's something ancient, something that feeds on fear and chaos. It doesn't just kill, it takes people, uses them. Vivian's face went pale. You're saying the passengers aren't gone? Not completely. Alive isn't quite right, Manuel said, his voice low. Changed, maybe. Gideon crossed his arms, skepticism clear on his face. Why didn't you say this earlier? Because it doesn't change anything, Manuel replied quietly. Whatever's happening here, you can't stop it. You can only survive it, if you're lucky. That's not good enough, Gideon said firmly. We're not just going to sit here and wait for this thing to pick us off. Manuel studied him for a moment, then sighed. You're stubborn. That might help, or it might get you killed. What about the notes? Vivian asked. Have you seen anything like that before? Messages left behind. Manuel shook his head. No, that's new. But I have a feeling it's tied to you. Gideon frowned. Why me? Because you're not like the others, Manuel said. You've been chasing this thing since the moment you stepped on board. It knows that, and it's testing you. Gideon's mind raced. Manuel's story, though cryptic, matched everything they'd seen so far. The shadows, the disappearances, the notes. Whatever was behind this wasn't random. It was deliberate. "We need to act," Gideon said finally. "We can't just wait for the next attack." "How?" Vivian asked. "We don't even know what we're fighting." "We don't need to fight it," Gideon said. "We need to outsmart it. Every move it's made has been calculated, but it's also left clues," he continued. "That means it wants us to figure something out." Manuel smirked faintly. "You think you can outsmart it? Good luck with that." Ignoring him, Gideon turned to Vivian and Gavin. The device in the chamber. It said the answer lies in the light. That wasn't a riddle. It was literal. Whatever's controlling this, whatever's driving the disappearances, it's connected to that light. "Then we go back," Vivian said, voice steady. Gavin looked horrified. "Back there? Are you serious?" "Yes," Gideon said. "If we don't, we're finished." Manuel stepped aside as the three moved toward the door. "If you're going back, you'd better hurry," he warned. "The shadows don't like being kept waiting." Gideon glanced back. "You coming?" Manuel shook his head. "I've already played this game once. Not doing it again." "Suit yourself," Gideon said, stepping into the corridor. The storm outside seemed louder now, the wind howling like a warning. As they made their way back to the engine room, the train jolted violently, throwing them against the walls. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadows shifted, crawling at the edges of their vision. "We're running out of time," Gideon said, picking up the pace. When they reached the engine room, the door was ajar. Inside, the blue light pulsed again, brighter and faster than before. Vivian hesitated at the threshold. "This feels worse than last time." "It is," Gideon said, "but it's our only chance." They stepped inside, and the light enveloped them once more. Chapter 14. Into the core. The blue light swallowed them whole, its pulsing rhythm pounding in Gideon's chest like a second heartbeat. The air felt heavier, the hum deeper and more resonant. As the light dimmed, they found themselves back in the metallic corridor, but everything was different. The once smooth walls were now lined with intricate symbols glowing faintly. The hum seemed to come from the very structure around them, as if the train itself was alive. "What is this place?" Vivian whispered, her voice shaky. Gideon scanned the corridor, eyes narrowing. A system, a machine, maybe both. Gavin pressed himself against the wall, breathing shallow. "This isn't right. We shouldn't be here." "No," Gideon said firmly. "This is exactly where we need to be." Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, its size impossible to reconcile with the train's dimensions. The ceiling stretched high, lost in shadows, while the floor was a mosaic of glowing tiles pulsing in time with the hum. At the center stood a massive column of light, its surface swirling with colors that shifted and flowed like liquid. Vivian stared at it, awe and fear mingling on her face. "Is that it?" Gideon nodded slowly. "The core. Whatever's controlling this train is in there." Gavin shook his head, backing away. "We shouldn't go near it. This isn't natural. It's not meant for us." "We don't have a choice," Gideon said, stepping forward. "Whatever this is, it's been pulling the strings from the start. The disappearances, the shadows, the notes. It all leads back to this." As they approached, the hum grew louder, vibrating through their bones. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and rearrange into patterns Gideon couldn't decipher. Vivian stopped suddenly, eyes fixed at the base of the column. "Look," she whispered. On a platform encircling the column stood the passengers who had disappeared. Edward Lane, Karen from Cabin 12, and others Gideon recognized but hadn't seen vanish. They stood motionless, faces blank, eyes glowing faintly blue. "They're alive," Vivian said, barely audible. "Or something close to it," Gideon added. Giant's voice was grim. One of them, a woman in a tailored suit, stepped forward, movements unnaturally fluid. She turned to face them, her glowing eyes locking onto Gideon. "You should not be here," she said, voice flat and mechanical. "We're not leaving," Gideon said. "Not until we get answers." The woman tilted her head, considering. "You were warned. The cycle cannot be broken." What cycle? Gideon demanded. What does this mean? The woman stepped closer, glowing eyes piercing. The balance must be maintained. Those who disrupt it must be corrected. Corrected? Vivian's voice rose. You mean killed? They are not dead, the woman said. They are realigned. Gideon clenched his fists. Realigned to what? What are you trying to achieve? The column pulsed, and the woman stopped, expressionless, as if listening to something only she could hear. The choice is yours, she said finally. Restore the balance, or lose everything. The floor trembled beneath them, the pulsing light intensifying. Gideon turned to Vivian and Gavin, mind racing. This is it, he said. This is the choice. What choice? Vivian asked, panic creeping into her voice. Restore the balance, Giants said. Let it take control and end the disruptions, or fight it and risk everything. The hum grew louder, drowning out their voices. The column flared, casting the room in blinding brightness. What do we do? Gavin shouted, voice barely audible over the noise. Gideon looked back at the motionless passengers, their glowing eyes empty yet somehow pleading. He thought of the notes, the warnings, the tension, and then made his decision. Chapter 15, The Decision. The blinding light surged, bathing the chamber in waves of energy pulsing with the deafening hum. Gideon's mind raced under the weight of the choice pressing down on him like the storm outside. Vivian and Gavin stood frozen beside him, faces pale with fear and uncertainty. Gideon's voice cut through the chaos, firm and steady. They don't want balance. They want control. If we give in, we lose ourselves. Vivian gripped his arm tightly. And if we fight, we might lose everything. Are you sure? Giant asked, jaw tightening. I've been around long enough to know when someone's pulling the strings. This isn't realignment. It's erasure. The glowing woman stepped forward, movements smooth and mechanical. You misunderstand. Resistance will only speed the collapse. Choose, restore balance, or face oblivion. Gavin trembled, eyes darting between Gideon and the column. We can't fight something like this. He gestured to the glowing passengers. Do you want to end up like them? We won't, Gideon said firmly. If we fight, we have a chance. If we give in, we're just pawns in their game. The column flared again, the room trembling with its intensity. The glowing passengers raised their hands in unison, movements unervingly synchronized. The woman's voice rang out cold and emotionless. Final warning. The cycle must not be broken. Gideon stepped forward, fists clenched. You keep talking about cycles and balance, but it's just words to hide behind. Whatever you are, you've been manipulating us from the start. We're not playing your game anymore. He turned to Vivian and Gavin. Find the device. If we shut it down, maybe we can stop this. Vivian nodded, fear replaced by determination. She scanned the chamber, searching for anything to disrupt the glowing core. Gavin hesitated, then followed her, steps unsteady. The glowing woman raised her hand, and the light dimmed, the hum dropping to a deep tone that shook the walls. Intervention will result in termination, she said, voice colder than ever. Then stop us, Gideon growled, voice defiant. The glowing passengers surged forward, movements faster and more aggressive. Gideon fought them off as best he could, but their numbers began to overwhelm him. Behind him, Vivian and Gavin worked frantically at a panel, the screen flashing with unfamiliar symbols. I think I've got it, Gavin shouted. One more command. A sudden surge of light engulfed the room, blinding them all. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, and for a moment, it felt like the entire train would tear itself apart. Then silence. When Gideon opened his eyes, he was back in a lounge car. The train was still. The storm outside had reduced to a faint drizzle. Vivian and Gavin sat slumped beside him, dazed but alive. The passengers were back in their seats, chatting quietly as if nothing had happened. The glowing woman, the column, the chamber, all gone. What just happened? Vivian whispered, voice shaky. I don't know, Gideon admitted, chest heaving. But we're still here. Gavin stared out the window, expression distant. Did we win? Gideon didn't answer.